Welcome to the Bryden Wood Podcast. Bryden Wood is a global strategy and design consultancy. We are inventive thinkers, designers, engineers, and technical experts. We integrate creativity and deep experience to resolve complex challenges and realize a better world. Find us at brydenwood.com.
So hello and welcome to the Bryden Wood Podcast. I'm Jaimie Johnston. I'm joined by Martin Wood, and we're going to be talking about the reconstruction effort in Ukraine. So a bit of scene setting and obviously context. This is a phenomenally complicated issue. No individual group or set of companies has got all the answers, so we're only going to talk about some very specific thoughts that we've had. Last week, the Institute for Global Prosperity, it's a group at UCL, just down the road from us in the Knowledge Quarter, released a document about reconstructing Ukraine. That covered a whole range of topics. So it was looking at agriculture, finance, economy, culture, all the different aspects that need consideration. We were asked to contribute to that report. And we put some ideas together based on obviously our areas of expertise and things that we've learned that might be applicable as the reconstruction effort starts to take place. So some very high level numbers. World Bank estimates the reconstruction effort will be somewhere between $500 billion and $1 trillion. That will have to happen at a time when obviously lots of people have left Ukraine. So there's a desperate need to carry out reconstruction at a vast scale at a time when you have a diminished labour pool. And so trying to solve some of those challenges, we thought we had some thoughts or some insights from previous work we've done. So the white paper we contributed to, we talked about a number of areas. One was sort of energy security and developing networks. One was around industrialised construction and how you might be able to deploy some of the thinking that's happened in that space. And there was a sort of linking it with digital tools. But Martin, I know you want to sort of start talking about energy network strategy, but I think you had some interesting thoughts around the current restructuring efforts versus the planned restructuring efforts and why they're different and what that might tell us.
Well, I suppose the reconstruction is happening on a daily basis in Ukraine because obviously it's by necessity, repairing infrastructure. Fortunately, the nature of the war is that the critical infrastructure of the country is being attacked, which is just a particular way of waging war upon a population, and so it's wiping out a lot of the power grid, and as well as obviously the attacks on the civilian population. So it's everyone knows it's an appalling war, and therefore every day repairs are being made by necessity so people can carry on existing living, getting through. But the question here really is when, and let's all hope it's sooner rather than later, when the time comes, what will be, that's all by necessity. What will they do in terms of reconstruction by design? And, and how is that design to be conceived? And the point of this podcast really is there any help? I mean, a lot of well-meaning countries looking towards Ukraine, and there'll be a lot of investment in Ukraine, but how will that investment be best targeted? In other words, how will the best value be created through the investment that's going to be poured into Ukraine? So reconstruction by design, I guess, is what we're interested in, and whether, obviously, being in the business of construction design, we had some thoughts, and as we said earlier, asked to contribute those thoughts into that paper. I guess the first one of those thoughts was to do with the actual energy infrastructure of Ukraine, because it's quite, it's one thing when the existing towns and infrastructure have been damaged, but in certain instances they've been completely wiped out, as we've seen from pictures, particularly obviously in the east of the country. And there's obviously a massive variation across Ukraine in terms of the damage. But in certain areas, it's a question, it's a really unusual question of would we have grown the network of industry and power distribution up like this if you started afresh? In certain instances, certain parts of the country, they'll be saying, okay, where should we've got to replace the power infrastructure? Do we do it in the way it was there before? Do we do it in a more diversified way? Are we going to introduce different power sources? Are we going to use a higher percentage of renewables or of nuclear or of whatever? Those are all questions that are going to have to be asked. When that happens, obviously power is the source of all things that are going to be at the heart of the reconstruction, because they're going to be the things going to drive the industry and commerce of the nation. So the choice of power, the choice of its distribution in the network, the replacement of the grid where it's necessary, are all going to potentially reconfigure some of the population centres in Ukraine. I mean, there are some amazing questions they've got to face, which is like, do we redevelop the east of Ukraine when it's still potentially threatened by the neighbouring Russia? I mean, how long will that threat maintain, and therefore how much would one want to reconstruct in an area that still has a potential threat? So there's some much bigger questions than we can answer in this podcast.
Yeah.
But the by design replacement of infrastructure has to consider the power source type, and as we wrote in our paper, Ukraine is an advanced country in terms of nuclear power, so it could replace its power infrastructure with an emphasis upon nuclear power, having all the skills and competencies, well, for the people that remain with skills and competencies in the areas, having some of the skills and competencies within the nation state itself, and aided and abetted by countries on the outside. It could replace its power infrastructure with nuclear more than other sources, in which case, obviously, that becomes a source of decarbonised power. They have a source of decarbonised power. They get a lead in terms of globally. They'll get a lead in terms of the green economy going forward. So,
well, this could be happening at a time when, we've talked about this on this podcast before. Lots of people are looking into small modular reactors, so it could be happening at a time when the market is burgeoning, the opportunity to sort of join that market, drive that market, or another use case for that market. The timing could work out quite well. But I think you also talked then about, if you had lots of clean power, there's other sustainability options that you have. There's other industries that might be propagated by placing that network properly.
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. Ukraine has a number of advantages. I mean, just advantages, historic advantages. So the other big elements of the green economy for the future will be, for example, biofuels. And again, Ukraine has a great deal of land suitable for production of biofuels. Most people will know that electrical grid power can solve a large part of the problem, but not all of the problem, because we know some high density fuels for aviation going forward, for example, which may be obtained from biofuel routes as opposed to power. So there's generally speaking, the reinvestment can shape their energy infrastructure and their industrial infrastructure in a way that no other country really, starting from where it's starting, can do as quickly. So we hear a lot in the UK about how we're going to become green technology leaders. Some evidence of that, maybe not as much as there is rhetoric, but there's some evidence of it. But Ukraine really could become a green an energy a leader in green technologies. Has a great deal of digital technologies in Ukraine. I mean, this is a country that is sort of anything but helpless in terms of its technological advancements before the war. In fact, we've seen the sort of unbelievable ingenuity, quite frankly, of the Ukrainian people using the abilities they already had. So it's far from a case of a nation that can't help itself. More of the question is what else can we contribute to that already strong technological ability of Ukraine to bring to bear, to which ends you sort of hope people are going to be very generous with not only money and investment but intellectual property. So, will nations grant pool effectively sort of the intellectual property that drives some of these new technologies and allow Ukraine, or at least make Ukraine, a great place to invest in for those technologies. And I think right at the heart of it is energy infrastructure and remapping exactly how that's to be rebuilt in Ukraine. Although as of this date, we don't know exactly what the damage to the grid or the damage to the power systems or how much replacement and renewal we can see for the future. But it's right at the heart of it.
But yeah, you talked about rebuilding the industry. We actually did a study a little while ago with a part of the UK government saying one thing you could do is import some of the modern methods of construction type systems into Ukraine. A better thing to do would be to help them rebuild that capability. So if you had lots of clean energy, rebuild the steel industry, rebuild the construction industry. So use that as an opportunity to kind of redevelop your own materials supply and upskill a bunch of people. So we were particularly talking about the sort of platforms, cross-sector platforms, construction methodology, and saying actually it hasn't really taken off in the UK. That would be the perfect sort of thing where you could upskill a bunch of people, develop a lot of components, common components, and start to create your own internal supply chain and remobilize your workforce, upskill, make more productive your workforce, and start to build that capability yourselves rather than it just being handed into you from bordering states.
Well, indeed, and the other thing we wrote about in the white paper was what role standardisation and manufacturing that you can derive from standardisation, what role that'll have in the replacement of the actual built assets, so hospitals, schools, housing, etc. Some of it will obviously be repair of existing housing stock and improvement of existing housing stock, but some of it will be built from scratch. And the question is, how will they go about doing that? Because if they do it by conventional methods with the building productivity that comes along with conventional methods, which is low, then it'll take a long time to reconstruct, and that's going to be very difficult for a population that's trying to get back on its feet. So really the question is, can they use a form of standardisation? We've seen it before. In fact, it's slightly, unfortunately, it's something that is often prevalent after a war. So, in the UK, we have Homes for Heroes.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, Russia replaced a great deal of its housing. So it wasn't all to do with the war, but it had a programme of highly standardised replacement of housing, which, ended up getting a very bad name, or a bad name, because it was seen as being authoritarian blocks where, the standardisation was almost used to sort of repress the population. But of course, the thing that we've looked into at great length in the UK is whether you can bring a higher level of standardisation. In fact, you must be able to bring a higher level of standardisation into the construction of the built environment. But you don't have to do it necessarily at the expense of any kind of flexibility and creativity. You can do both at the same time, and it's all about choosing the right granularity of standardization, as we call it. In other words, size of the standard elements are small enough such that they can be reconfigured into a massive variation of different configurations of all of this building stock, so that you get what you want, which is you get that urban environment that's got the kind of flexibility and creativity that we all want to live in. So they're not necessarily a contradiction in terms, standardization and the creativity. But if they don't introduce the manufactured speed and productivity of sort of industrial building systems, then it's going to be a very long road to reconstruction. Now, there's quite a lot of work and effort been done in the UK, and I think can be brought, again, talking of the open IP, can be brought to Ukraine and allow them to build up their own industries for the manufacture of standard construction components, and that can accelerate alongside the techniques of assembly, typically called DFMA, Design for Manufacture and Assembly, that'll help them reconstruct the country with a lower workforce, smaller workforce, and at a faster rate. And I think that's something we wrote out about the white paper, and it's the other element, one of the other elements that can be gifted to Ukraine as a country.
Yeah, just to build on that, as you say, we've looked across all sorts of sectors: healthcare, education, residential. I think you made the point in the white paper. There is a frustratingly near level of standardisation that never quite hits it, and you go in those sectors where people design from scratch, they tend towards fairly
many similar
common solutions.
Never the same.
Yeah, so you could lean into that and actually
what we build in the UK.
Codify that. Yeah.
And of course, the problem with many similar buildings we're not the same is you're not really getting a great deal of variation, and you're paying handsomely for the differences.
Yes.
Really, it's something Ukraine could avoid in the reconstruction process, and it's something, like I say, the technology to do that's available.
So it was well documented. We did a lot of work on it. UK government, IPA wrote in their roadmap to 2030. That was a plan for delivering social infrastructure in the UK. It hasn't quite taken off, but there is a huge amount of thinking that's already done, which again is completely available, that on your point about the IP, all of that could be transferred immediately and could be used as a real sort of starting point to drive some of these processes and say, if you did that by first intent, and again, maybe you can't in the UK because of the procurement and the frameworks and the IP and the risk and all these things, maybe you can't embed it in an existing infrastructure or system. But if you're starting from scratch and you have the necessity and you have the needs and an answer's there, that must be an opportunity to really start to develop these things.
All this feeds into, there'll be a great deal of investment into Ukraine. But the question of how much of that is to the direct benefit of the Ukrainians and how much does it come to the benefit of others, and that's slightly unfortunate things in the reconstruction after conflict is that the investment is not always, every pound spent is not always necessarily delivering the best possible value to the nation. And I think there's a few people that would think that Ukraine, well, certain elements of Russia, I guess, but that don't think Ukraine deserve all of the value they can possibly extract from any investment that goes into the country. I mean, one of the other things that Ukraine has on its side is that, as we talked about in the paper, was that it quite frankly before the war was a leading digital force in digital technologies, and that can only be good in terms of, firstly, we talked about by design as opposed to by necessity. The best form of by design is by being able to simulate what you might do and how and what results it might achieve, and to optimize and maximize those results. So, in other words, it allows you to think harder and get a better result rather than just necessarily reacting almost too quickly. Can't be too quick in many instances, but too quickly and not and the reconstruction again not being lower value than it could be. So that digital simulation of both the power infrastructure, the industries, and then also the construction and the construction processes will lead people to have sort of an unprecedented idea of how to bring investments into the country in the most controlled manner. Something never been available in the reconstruction after conflict before. It's been much more of guesswork, and of course that guesswork's led to. I go back to the UK example of Homes for Heroes. I think that people will cite many examples of rather unfortunate housing and redevelopment that happened after the Second World War and become a bit of a butt of a joke. But it was important and necessary at the time. It just could have been done with more foresight and better planning, and the Ukrainians have in their hands the digital simulation capabilities to do that to a higher level than ever before. So that's.
But I think that the digital capability would run as you say, the whole way through. That there was always this sort of certainly industrialised construction. People talk an awful lot about digital twins and the fact that digital configuration, all of those sorts of tools, the procurement, all those sorts of things. Again, it's quite hard to apply that to existing infrastructure and. A whole lot of infrastructure where most of it exists and you're trying to document existing things. But again, if you simulated it up front, done the planning up front, use that to develop the components and the configurations, you've got a much better chance of linking all those things together. And as you say, they're incredibly well, have all the right sort of capabilities to actually properly join up what's been an aspirational thing in other countries. So again, big opportunity potentially to link all of these things in a much more joined up way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and development and configurates so that you can assess the impact, the cost, the program, the speed, of reconstruction. It can be started now. I mean, nobody knows when the war's going to end, but everyone is willing it to be soon. But the question is, what kind of flying start can we have? Does there have to be a period of does there have to be a period of reflection before this can occur, or can some of these things be put in place, and some of the thinking and simulation can be done even before the either a long-term ceasefire or complete cessation of any kind of aggression occurs? And I think we all agree that would be the right way to do it, so that things could be physically actioned as soon as possible.
Yeah. Going back to your earlier point, you think people start trying to contribute what they can or make available what they can. They must, I think that's the Institute for global prosperity, that's one of the things I'd like to start convening, is these things saying anyone who can contribute should start to. How do we start to coalesce around these ideas, and how do we start to make as much available as soon as possible as we can?
Well, it's like all these things. It's where's the point of focus? Who's collecting it? Who's becoming the fulcrum around which all of us, like I say, all of this. I'm sure all this goodwill towards Ukraine can be focused, so that when they get to into position to utilize it, they know where it all is. It's all documented in a single place. All the contacts and all the offers of IP and thinking and support can all be conduited through a simple point of contact, one organisation or several organisations, but not just a vast array of individual well-meaning parties who don't coalesce to provide a practical answer. So the Institute for Global Prosperity in the UK seem to be acting as that. They seem to be acting as that focal point, where I imagine the same is being done, similar is being done in other nations. And I think the next step would be people to combine it together and actually create a sort of certainly a pan-European version, if not a global version of that, so that we're all ready.
Yeah. So we'll leave it there. I think that was hopefully useful conversation. We will continue to try and contribute where we can, and hopefully we'll post a link to the Institute for Global Prosperity white paper. Anyone who's got an interest in this would be encouraged to read it, and hopefully we can all add something to the debate.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening.